The debate over separating illegal alien children from their parents at the border rages. But is the Trump administration doing what the media tells you? And could the Obama administration have been much, much worse? We'll discuss. Donald Trump is horrible, the most terrible human being ever to live, right? I mean, his policy, his Nazi, jackbooted thug, white supremacist, hater of brown people from south of the border policy is to rip babies from their mother's arms, screaming, outreaching for one another as they're crossing the border. Except that's really not true. That's what the mainstream media, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, the New York Times is telling you. They've gone as far as to disgracefully and disgustingly use the term concentration camp. What an insult to the memory of 6 million Jews killed during the Holocaust. And to add insult to injury, it wasn't just far-left commentators. On MSNBC, former RNC, Republican National Committee Chair, Michael Steele, one of the worst RNC chairs in history, he used the term concentration camp. But wait, there's more. General Michael Hayden, the former CIA and NSA director, he used the term concentration camp on Twitter, actually put up a photo of train tracks leading to a concentration camp more than used the term. I and many others resoundingly called out General Michael Hayden for daring to compare the honest, ethical, hardworking men and women of Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Protection, and ICE, Nazi SS, Gestapo. The Trump derangement syndrome is off the charts. It's disgusting. These people are unhinged. So let's break this down and explain what's really going on here. All right. First and foremost, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, called the media irresponsible. Let me read you a tweet from Secretary Nielsen. Quote, "This misreporting by members, meaning members of Congress on the left, press and advocacy groups must stop. It is irresponsible and unproductive. As I have said many times before, if you are seeking asylum for your family, there is no reason to break the law and illegally cross between ports of entry." And this is what's critically important here. And I need to spend some time on this. The left is trying to tell you that the people crossing illegally are asylum seekers. The Secretary of Homeland Security is saying, if you're an asylum seeker, you don't need to cross illegally. Come to a legal port of entry, i.e. a border, a Customs and Border Protection or Immigration and Customs Enforcement station at a marina, an airport, and ask for asylum. Request asylum. The Refugee Protection Act of 1967 and its update of 1980 affords you protections if you do that. There is no need to swim across the Rio Grande. When you swim across the Rio Grande with your baby in your arms, you risk having your child taken away. If you walk up to a border checkpoint, speak to an ICE agent or a Border Patrol agent and say, "I'm seeking asylum, I'm persecuted in my country," your protections begin. This is very, very simple. Very, very simple. Now, Trump administration, this is from a Fox News piece, but I'm just parroting what the president said last week. He did an impromptu press conference on Friday morning, really on the lawn of the White House and the driveway of the White House. Fox writes, the Trump administration, which has called it, quote, horrible that illegal immigrant children are sometimes separated from their parents when their parents enter criminal proceedings, has been criticized in recent weeks for increasing the prosecutions of illegal aliens under a zero-tolerance policy that critics say lead to those separations. However, something else very important in there, another bit of minutia that's being ignored. In most cases, when someone does come illegally and then requests asylum, they're not supposed to do, the kids that are being removed when you dig into the data, are typically kids of parents who have another issue. They've been deported multiple times. They are suspected of a crime in the United States or in their home country. There's an ICE detainer for them. They're on some intelligence watch list for crime, for terror, for narcotics trafficking, for human trafficking. And at that point, authorities have no choice. I cannot tell you how many times as a cop I had to remove kids from their parents. If you go to jail, we don't send the children to jail with you. We don't leave them sitting in the house by themselves. We don't leave them on a sidewalk alone. What do these people on the left in the mainstream media expect ICE to do? Say to a toddler, well, your mom has an immigration detainer, an ICE detainer here, and she's suspected of working with the Sinaloa cartel. But here you go, kid. Here's a bottle of water and some crackers. Mexico's that way. Wear some shade in the desert. Oh, here's some sunscreen. No, we can't do that to a 4-year-old. Unfortunately, we have to take these children and put them into a shelter to safeguard them. Well, then the critics say, these shelters are locked. There are steel gates. Well, yeah. We don't want these 4-year-olds running out at the middle of the night into traffic. Of course, we're going to lock the doors. That's what safeguarding is. These are not concentration camps. People aren't being put to work, then systematically, wholesale exterminated. It is disgusting to use that term. Reprehensible to use that term. Because a child illegally entering the U.S. is generally separated from adults at the border if the child is in danger, has no clear relationship to the adult, or if the adult enters criminal proceedings. The same exact criteria that domestic law enforcement here in the U.S. follow every single day, hundreds, if not thousands of times a day, when removing children from American citizens who endanger the child, are not related to the child. There's no legal guardianship or enter criminal proceedings. Again, I can't tell you how many kids I had to bring down to the Department of Children and Family Services in New York City because I arrested a parent and there was no other guardian there. We can't take them on patrol with us. Can't leave them in an NYPD police precinct. Can't leave the kid in the house by themselves or on the sidewalk. They have to go somewhere safe. This is common sense. This has been established law enforcement practice for decades upon decades. It's been established practice for centuries at this point. This is just moronic. Secretary Nielsen went on to say, unequivocally, in a tweet, quote, "We do not have a policy of separating families at the border, period." And she went on to say, you are not breaking the law by seeking asylum at a port of entry. For those, these are tweets from Secretary Nielsen. For those seeking asylum at ports of entry, we have continued the policy from previous administrations and will only separate if the child is in danger. Again, there is no custodial relationship between family members, or if the adult has broken a law. But the mere presentation of yourself, of the illegal, to authorities at the border requesting asylum is not under the Refugee Protection Acts of 67 and 80, the addendum, the amendment. That is not considered breaking the law. You're being lied to by the mainstream media. This is one of the worst cases of fake news I've ever come across. You are being lied to. You're being lied to. Now, Democrats have been trying to go into detention facilities. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But let's talk about the deafening silence on the left back in 2015. In front of me, I have a Washington Post story. Mexican kids held for months. This is the important part. As punishment for border crossing. And you know when this story was from? Not last week. Not this weekend. March 11th, 2015, during the Obama administration. Wow. And these are kids that were smuggled here. These are kids that were smuggled. All right? Tragic. They're little kids. Now, let me read this to you. Last spring, as Central American children flooded into Texas from, now remember, this is March of 2015. But they're talking about 2014. So this is March of 2015. They're talking about last spring. That's very important because that was spring of 2014. And you remember all those photos we saw of children in cages from the Hill and other places trying to make it seem like it was under Donald Trump? No. Those photos were mostly from around April 2014. So I'm reading this story and remember the context and the date of those photos. Last spring, as Central American children flooded into Texas in a way he had never seen in his 3-decade career, border agent Robert Harris decided to experiment. His intelligence analysts estimated that 78% of the guides smuggling other migrants were Mexicans younger than 18. So the coyotes bringing others across the border illegally were themselves Mexican minors, Mexicans under 18. Teenagers often hired or conscripted by the drug cartels who knew they would not be prosecuted if caught. And he wanted to attack this loophole. Why don't we remove these juveniles from the smuggling cycle? Harris, the outgoing commander of the Laredo sector of Customs and Border Protection, recalled thinking. Now, as a result of that decision, young Mexicans are being held for months without charge in shelters across the U.S. Back 3 years ago. More than 3 years is 3 months ago. Sometimes without their parents' knowledge. Since the program began in May, 536 juveniles have been held, 248 of whom have been deported to Mexico after an average stay of 75 days. That's according to the Border Patrol. Okay. The Obama administration began this policy because it's important to note that when you see the current photos of these what look like camps, tents, but the tents have air conditioning and high-speed wireless and video games and other buildings are one shelter now, one big shelter for these kids was in a former Walmart building with bedrooms. And look, I'm not going to say these are wonderful places. These are still shelters, and these little kids are ripped from their parents, right? They are. I mean, we are taking them from their parents, but it's necessary. My heart goes out to them. I don't want to see a little 2-year-old girl. We've seen the image of her crying hysterically for her mom. My heart bleeds for that kid. The mom broke the law. And we can't send that little girl across the desert by herself. It's a terrible situation for law enforcement to be put in. They're doing the right thing. They're doing the right thing. They're putting the kid in a safe facility in a bed. With air conditioning, with food, with water, with doctors, with security. It's far safer than the country that kid came from. Sure. One of the problems is they're not allowed to touch the children. They got these crying kids. Nobody can give them a hug. It's heartbreaking. It really, really is heartbreaking. But the mom or the dad are the ones to blame. They came illegally, possibly knowing they had committed other crimes or on an anti-terror or a cartel watch list. This policy began under Barack Obama. So the reason I bring up the shelters is that it's an important note. Department of Homeland Security data tells us that in those shelters, 90% were unaccompanied minors. 90% were these scenarios that I just read you. Kids coming to the border alone or working for the cartels to smuggle. Only 10% of the kids you're seeing in those shelters, these images the mainstream media is trying to use to paint Trump as a Nazi and a white supremacist and this oppressive dictator, only 10% were separated from their parents at the border. Right? And in those instances, as Secretary Nielsen notes, there was a reason. Authorities felt the child was in danger. The parent couldn't care for them. Authorities felt that the parent wasn't really the parent. There was no custodial relationship there. So that individual adult had no right to have that child with them in the first place. Or the parent broke the law, had a warrant, had an ICE detainer, had some thing that required a criminal proceeding. And look, we can't send the kids to jail, can't leave them on the street, can't give them a bottle of water and send them back across the desert, right? Can't do it. Now, everybody is concerned about this. Everybody. First Lady Melania Trump rarely makes policy statements. Melania Trump made a policy statement. She said that both sides of the aisle need to come together to achieve successful immigration reform. That's a quote. She said she hates to see children separated from their parents. Her communications director, Stephanie Grisham, told CNN, quote, Mrs. Trump hates to see children separated from their families and hopes both sides of the aisle can finally come together to achieve successful immigration reform. She believes we need to be a country that follows all laws, but also a country that governs with heart. She's right. Everyone wants this problem solved. Everyone. Now, First Lady Laura Bush, former First Lady Laura Bush, wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, yesterday, and she said basically the same. She said she lives in a border state. She appreciates the need to enforce and protect our international boundaries, but this zero-tolerance policy is cruel, it is immoral, and it breaks her heart. Well, Obama had the same policy, Mrs. Bush, and let me say, I always thought Laura Bush was a dignified, graceful First Lady, always admired her, think she's a very nice woman, still do. She's dead wrong on this. Laura Bush and her husband, George W. Bush, somebody that I voted for twice, somebody I respected, that I don't anymore. I believe he loves America. But what I don't respect is George and Laura Bush remained dead silent while Obama tried to impose socialism in this nation. They remained dead silent while day in and day out he sat in the Oval Office and via executive order and caveat tried to erode the Constitution. They didn't say a word. When Obama was punitively, and this is the big difference here, okay? Obama's administration was punitively jailing these kids. Trump administration is doing it in certain circumstances, and it's not jail, it's a shelter. The Obama administration was actually putting them in what would look more like jails, in cages. George and Laura Bush sat dead, silent, didn't say a word. Not a word. But now, because they don't like Trump, because Trump called Jeb Bush low energy, they're out there criticizing, going back on, reversing, violating decade upon decade upon decade of Bush family policy to never comment on another administration when a Bush is out of office, whether it's Congress or the presidency. But when it's Trump, all bets are off. Got to take him down. Got to take Trump down. Now, Democratic lawmakers in New Jersey decided to launch a stunt the other day, and they were New York and New Jersey lawmakers, all Dems, all far left. They went to an ICE detention center in yesterday for a surprise Father's Day visit, and they included a who's who of far left morons. Representatives Hakeem Jeffries of New York, Gerald Nadler of New York, Adriano Espaillat from New York, Carolyn Maloney from New York, Frank Pallone Jr. from New Jersey, Abi Osiris from New Jersey, and Bill Pascrell from New Jersey. They arrived around 9 a.m. for their publicity stunt with cameras in tow, and intelligently and appropriately, they were denied entry, screaming and yelling and stomping their feet. Eventually, they were allowed more than an hour later, after they were banging on the door, telling ICE and local police they would not move. Here's what Representative Carolyn Maloney, who wants to take everybody's guns, said. Now, these people just, whatever. Quote, after being made to wait over an hour, after having to deal with local PD, after banging on the door and making it clear that we will not move, in capitals, until allowed in, ICE is finally granting us access to see individuals who have been separated from their families. We are now speaking with detainees who were separated from their children when they sought asylum in the U.S. from terrible violence and danger at home. But that's really not it. They came illegally. They didn't properly go through the asylum process. Okay? The new excuse on the left is, well, they don't have access to the internet. They don't know how to seek asylum. No, I think in 2018, you could find out. Because they seem to make their way through 1,000 whatever miles of Mexico, maybe more. And I'm guessing that along the way, you could probably stop and find out how to ask for asylum in the United States. Now, these people are choosing to cross illegally. The Trump administration is being eviscerated, is being vilified, is being called Nazi, white supremacist, cruel, dictatorial, just authoritarian, all of these horrible, horrible things for having the audacity to do something they should be doing, which is enforce federal immigration law. That's what they're doing wrong. They're enforcing federal immigration law. And they're being roundly criticized by the left for doing so. Unfortunately, from some neocons and rhinos on the right as well. But I say this to the Trump administration. Keep on keeping on. This is a drastic problem, and it's going to take drastic measures. And law enforcement, I often say, does not look pleasant because you're enforcing a law that someone broke. The optics of that, pretty much 10 times out of 10, are going to look bad. But it needs to be done. Like I always tell you, society falls down. That's why I want the Trump administration to keep doing what they're doing. Society falls down when we put political correctness before public safety. This is a really important topic. One of the most important I think we've ever covered. Nobody wants to see little children separated from their families. It's important to understand the difference between fact and fiction. I'm going to bring it to you every day. Help me do that by subscribing to our premium service at www.therebel.media/shows. Go to the App Store, download Rebel app. Great way to get all of our content. Hope you guys had a great weekend. As always, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.